Nau mai, Raraunga. Welcome to the Whāki webinar series, which is hosted by the Te Kotahi Research Institute at the University of Waikato. For this particular episode, Tauhokohoko Indigenising Trade, our research collaboration, will be facilitating a discussion. And I want to welcome our hosts, our guests, to this particular conversation. It's entitled From Procurement Pipelines to Indigenous Trade Partnerships. We have Anna Jane Edwards from Amotai, Chris Rees from Supply Nation in Australia, Cassandra Darrington from Dorrington from Canada. Welcome, and as we begin, I want to acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Te Whenua Moemoeā, the land of dreaming, Australia, and Te Whenua Hunu, Turtle Island in Canada. I'll give you some time throughout the questions to briefly introduce yourself and answer our first question, but I know time is short. Thank you for joining us today. I thought as a starter, perhaps we'll start with you, Chris, and then to Cassandra, and then to Anna. In your country, what are the key policy, procurement and ecosystem conditions that have enabled Indigenous businesses to successfully participate in and benefit from public and private sector procurement opportunities?
Thank you, Nanaya, and good morning, everybody. My name's Chris Rees. I'm calling from the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Meanjin, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present of the traditional custodians of this land, the first traders, the first teachers, the first students on the land, and recognise the privilege that we have to be able to do what we do alongside them and their ancestors. Nunai, that's a massive question, and I will try to keep it fairly brief, but I think from the point of view of the history, of course, Australia's, and this is relevant to the procurement question, the history of Australia's formal reconciliation activities with Indigenous Australia sort of goes back to about 1938. There have been a variety of things happening, but things really sort of started focusing around 1991 when the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation was established. And a big outcome of that was the establishment of Reconciliation Australia in 2001, which really set the engagement between non-Indigenous Australia, especially organisations, and Indigenous Australia. Things got a bit of a wriggle on in 2008 when Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made his apology to the stolen generations. And that really started focusing people on, okay, what are those consequences of that? Two consequences followed fairly quickly. In 2009, Australia chose to support the United Nations Determination of the Rights of Indigenous People. It had been one of only 4 countries prior to that had not done so. So that shift came about, as was, if I may say, the establishment of Supply Nation, which was set up to connect Indigenous companies with non-Indigenous corporate buyers. And as that started to grow, then the idea of reconciliation action plans were really getting on. Now, reconciliation action plans are things that are held by almost every major organisation in Australia that is a public statement of their commitment to commit to reconciliation activities. But for corporates, they also include economic elements, and quite often they will set procurement targets in there. So you're now starting to see corporates make public statements about what their economic engagement with Indigenous Australia is going to be. And then in 2015, the federal government introduced the Indigenous Procurement Policy, which provided mandates, targets, and set-asides for federal government agencies to be procuring from Indigenous companies. So I think from the point of view of the policy ecosystem, what we're seeing is an increasing push. I guess culturally, what we are seeing too that's really important is that as people are proactively and positively looking for opportunities to procure from Australian Indigenous businesses, from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses, you're also seeing that Indigenous business owners are increasingly taking a great deal of pride in being an Indigenous business owner, in celebrating some of those advantages that one has from operating an Indigenous business, as well as recognising that it has been a process of reconciliation to get to that point. And I think that those sorts of things, where you have a government commitment, where you have genuine corporate, which is entirely voluntary, commitment to not only procurement but engagement with Indigenous companies, and an increasingly strong and confident Indigenous business community, is probably the setting that we find ourselves in now.
Thanks for that, Chris. Just to tweak the question slightly, to lean into the Australian experience, if there was a policy setting that might supercharge where you are now to where you want to be, what would that look like?
In terms of a policy setting, I mean, where do you start? Because obviously there are some really good policies in place. Very few policies in this space are ever perfect, but that would be a bit of a cop out. You just say, I wish the current policies were better written and better pursued. I think, though, that, and we'll probably get into this later on, that the more that these organisations, including government, think beyond merely the procurement processes and think about how they can be using their core business to be enhancing Indigenous opportunities. So you've already got that sort of organisational commitment, but busting it out of a kind of a narrow framework of only thinking about procurement, which means it's only in the hands of the procurement people, and get those senior people who are encouraging those procurement people to look at other elements in their organisation and say, hey, come and join the party. We've got some great ideas. We've already got relationships. We've already got trust with these organizations. You're not starting from scratch. Let's start building. That I would love to see that.
So we shift our attention to Cassandra, and for those who have joined our webinar, if you've got questions, please throw them in the chat. Cassandra, in terms of the context in Canada, what are the environmental ecosystem conditions, key policy levers that have enabled procurement? In particular, though, I'd like you to lean into your experience with private sector procurement with Indigenous businesses.
Okay, perfect. I love where Chris is going. And I always consider Australia one of the gold stars for what they've been doing. But Canada there's been some efforts in Canada that I'm really proud of. Okay, so in the Canadian context, we constantly have legislation at the federal government level on a duty to consult with Indigenous peoples. So, and whenever they're doing construction work, they're doing any projects, many major federal projects, there's a duty to consult that starts the dialogue before anything gets started. So if you're reading it in the press or any of the issues around Canada, whether it be pipelines or anything else, it starts with the duty to consult before they can even put shovels in the ground or do anything else. So that comes with pluses and minuses that go with that. But on the other side of that as well, we've had the federal government who's had a 5% objective for spend with Indigenous people on any projects they've had. And the last year or two, they've been very joyous and say, look, we've made our numbers, but there's been a question mark on the way the numbers were calculated. And anybody who deals with government, it's usually sort of, are all the departments doing it the same way? And so that's why we've had our ombudsman, the federal ombudsman, say that one of the issues you see while the Canadian government has this 5% spend, this procurement strategy for Indigenous people that we've had in place is not as well understood under all the departments and agencies across Canada. And as a result, and you heard Chris say, if everybody was doing it the same way, as a result of it not being understood and being implemented the same way, there's been some gaps in that process. So from a federal government perspective, they're moving in the right direction, but there's some work required for them to get it right. The nice thing, and you'll hear me say later on, our current federal government and the Prime Minister in particular is talking about nation building projects and buying from all Canadians. So he very much has a focus on making sure Indigenous is at the table as he's looking to do that, to make that happen. But when you consider on the private side of the house, which you've asked me about, 2004, CAMC was established. That started the dialogue with private sector being able to say, we want to buy from both Indigenous, racialized Black entrepreneurs. And private sector have been and because they don't have as many administrative things to go through, hoops to go through, they've been very clear on how do we find Indigenous suppliers that we want to work with. So we've seen some great stories where they have come and they've worked with our Indigenous suppliers. So whether it be the EYs who've gotten them on board and did some serious training to make sure they build capacity, get them in front of some of their other clients, to whether even be government agencies like Canada Post who are very big on that, or our CBRE or BGIS, they've all been very clear on the programs they have and what the work they want to do with Indigenous suppliers. So we see some great success from the corporate. Again, I'll say the corporate are able to do it easily or more easily because they don't have as many hoops and hurdles to go through. The federal government has a lot more rigor around what our Financial Services Act look like and what we have to do here. And it takes a longer time for the federal government to actually see the real fruits of their labor. So from a Canadian perspective, I like to say that we've seen some real success with corporate who have bought in and say, we want to do this work. How do we make this happen? Find us some good suppliers and actually build relationships and joint ventures with suppliers. So I'm really pleased with what I'm seeing from that perspective.
Well, that's wonderful. Look, can we turn to Anna? And as the tainer in the procurement maturity curve to both Canada and Australia, what are the key elements of the procurement experience that your friends have had that you've learnt and want to see more of in the New Zealand context?
You're on mute.
It's always one of us, eh? Always. Kia ora Nanaya. I just wanted to mihi to Chris and Cassandra for joining us today, and recognise that we've been friends and colleagues for a number of years now. And as Nanaya has said, I have learnt, our organisation has learnt so much from being a part of a network of people that are deeply passionate about utilising procurement as a lever for impact in Indigenous communities. I think the thing that I've taken from both of your kōrero so far is CAMC was established in 2004, Supply Nation in 2009, Amotai in 2020. So there is a significant time difference in our journey in Aotearoa. But in saying that, there is already a large Māori and Pacifica business sector that is thriving, and our role has really been about understanding how we open access and connect opportunities to Māori and Pacifica businesses across Aotearoa, just like Supply Nation and just like CAMC. It's time in the game, if I'm being honest. It's utilising the learning from both Canada and Australia, the US, the UK, South Africa, and deeply understanding our context and applying it in different ways. Amotai was actually started in its first iteration in 2018. We were starting things in Auckland Council in 2016. And it's through those learnings that we were able to develop a first procurement policy that was then adopted by central government through the Labour government in 2020, where they set a 5% target for spend with Māori businesses. What we saw after that was this avalanche of growth in terms of the corporate sector and government agencies from across Aotearoa joining Amotai, interested in utilising the directory to not only meet that target, but to bring to life the S in ESG. I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested as we move forward. Sorry, let me just go back a second. So that happened in 2020. And then in 2024, that 5% target was taken out of the policy. So that's we saw this avalanche of growth, and then this change of appetite across central government, which has seen a change in the way in which central government primarily is interacting with Māori Pacifica businesses and Amatai as a result. What is really beautiful about this, though, is that corporate New Zealand hasn't stepped away in the way that we thought would potentially happen. Actually, they've leaned in. And it's because of the partnerships that we have with CAMSI and Supply Nation and others across the globe that they are more interested in how they bring those supply chains together in a more meaningful way. So I think the target, the policy is a really important thing. It set the foundation for supply diversity in Aotearoa. What it looks like moving forward, regardless of what government is next, as we are in an election year, it's corporate New Zealand's interest in the enduring impact that they can get through ESG outcomes and through bringing life to their actions towards Te Tiriti o Waitangi that I'm really keen to explore.
A follow-up question for all of you is around reporting of that success, both for an audience that is government facing, but more importantly, to a private sector that wants to do more, but also wants to accumulate the benefits of great reporting, comparative examples of best practice across their various sectors. Are there any comments you'd like to offer on that approach? Let's start this time with Cassandra, move to Anna and then Chris.
You've hit on something that all my corporates would be lined up and say, is everyone doing it the same way? Because they're all collecting their own data, and they all have their own individual dashboards, and they really are using these quite well. But what we've tried to do with GSDA is like, can we at least have some common language that we're talking about? And let's try to create some commonality across this. Because if we're going to be able to achieve this global trade that needs to go on and get suppliers ready for the global, we want to have global success stories that go on. And so this being able to report what the key metrics are from here to here to here. Again, what are the commonalities? What are the differences and what are the metrics? That's going to be incredibly important for us going forward. Right now, if you talk to someone like an EY, they'll have their global numbers. And if you talk to someone like a Centra, they'll have their global numbers, but they're not the same numbers. And so what we're looking at is, can we come up with something that has some steady numbers across? And I love when Anna Jane was talking about ESG. We thought with ESG, we'd be able to get some commonality. It started there, but then they went off target again because all the geopolitics that went on, everyone sort of went under. But I think that needs to be revived again to come up with commonality in reporting if we're going to see some success and be able to measure from country to country to country. Chris, I don't know what you think about that. You've been around this as long as I have right now.
I'm happy to dive in there, Naya. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We are increasingly seeing, so we've got almost 900 organisations that we help to find Indigenous suppliers for. The majority of those are corporate. Probably about 170, 180 of them are multinationals. So they are organisations whose activities are being directed from somewhere else and who have Indigenous engagement activities in a variety of countries. And so I think it's a very interesting question, because I think in most cases, Indigenous engagement in individual countries is a very localised matter addressing localised issues And therefore, not surprisingly, you get localized solutions to those. And I think the ability of what you're saying, Cassandra, for organizations, that includes the 3 organizations represented here, to sort of say, hey, let's think about what standardized reporting can be. But the other point about how do corporates know if they're doing things the right way? We have a system where we report, where they report their spend to us. We have systems in place to try to standardize that as much as possible. But there can always be more nuances. We have gatherings of our members. We have a procurement roundtable where issues are discussed. Mostly it's how can we better engage with great suppliers, or how can we help develop suppliers in their earlier stages. But questions of reporting come up there as well. I do think the role of our organizations in that is important. I mean, we did touch on, Cassandra, you mentioned that you came about in 2004 and we were established in 2009, and the entire existence of Supply Nation, we've had unbelievable support from CAMSI and from your good self. And just that sharing and openness is sort of part of the industry we're in. Anna Jane, I think there were probably some folk going back maybe as far as 2017 from your part of the world, went to the NMSDC conference, probably in Detroit, with some of the Supply Nation people, and just started conversations going. And I think it's really important, but it's important to us. Sure, it's important to our suppliers, but I think that connectivity is important to the corporates to know that, there are people out there that are trying to help them around that standardization. And there are also a lot of corporates who have their own measures, and they only want their own measures. Large mining companies have a variety of Indigenous engagement activities, of which procurement is only one. A whole lot of business development activities that can involve financing, can involve recruitment and training and all that sort of stuff, where, they kind of quite happy doing their thing too.
I know, have you got some thoughts on this, on the reporting, or, how to get that move from local to global, and what counts as success?
It was actually me that was on that delegation to NMSDC with Supply Nation. And I think about it, like in 2017, that was the catalyst for the establishment of Amotai as we know it today. And I think about Canada in the same way, that, all 4 of us on the call, plus our other hoa from Tauhokohoko, were in Canada late April, early May. And it's in those times when we are together in person that some of these really big opportunities and dreams start to take formation. And I'm super excited and inspired from the time in Canada around what we could create in terms of Indigenous with Indigenous, Indigenous to Indigenous business opportunities. And I think that really is the next platform, the next step in the platform, I guess, for us. To your point, Nanaya, yes, there is a definite opportunity around creating some more consistent reporting, some more consistent certification models that just help us to work across jurisdictions. And I also take what Chris is saying around local solutions for local communities. For me, it's about how do we take the best of what's working across the different jurisdictions, create something that the corporate pipeline in particular understands and would be interested in supporting the growth of, and then start really small, thinking about those businesses that joined us in Canada to really understand what it takes to create opportunities for Indigenous to Indigenous business.
Nana, I might just that last point of Anna's is so important, because it's not just how do these corporates do their things, what have you, but we are talking about some individual companies who who we were engaged with, and in fact, a number of, I think about 5 different Canadian representatives of businesses that we work with closely in Australia sort of came up to me like people follow me on the street. They don't, but they work out who you are because you've got a badge on you, right? And they say, we'd love to have conversations about how we can get standardizations across our organization. We'd like to first and foremost learn what each other is doing really well and copy it. And then we'd like to standardize it, and we'd like to be able to report it, and we'd like to be able to learn from it, and we'd like to be able to be as good as we can. So while you have companies wanting to know, are we doing the same as another company, this desire within companies to get that standardization and that quality uplift is really profound.
That helps us segue into the second theme, which is scaling. But in terms of the support systems to enable scale, where does certification and standard setting fit in? We'll start that one with Cass, then move to Anna, and then Chris.
Okay. For me, certification in the North American context, and you fellows have all read the newspaper, in the North American context, certification is sort of setting over here and it's being attacked. But for certification, for me, has always simply been a market access tool. It's not been anything that does more than identify the crowd I want to work with. Let's make sure we're clear who they are. And so if we move from there, from certification, that's your market access. The big thing is, as I'm talking about scaling, is how do I build capacity? How do I build finance? How do I provide opportunity? And I build from that perspective. Canadian government has done a good job with organizations such as the Business Development Bank of Canada, a few others. NACA has money out there. It's like we want to create startups, not just startups, but we want to create access to funds that enable you to grow your business. Because the opportunity coming up, but if you can't add more money to capacity, whether it be facilities, whether it be people, you need the money to be able to do that, to deliver on the business. So it's really important to have that access to finance, but access to finance alone doesn't guarantee success. We need to have capacity building that we're doing at the same side. And we also need that access to opportunities that are scalable opportunities, that you come in an opportunity. Let's say you're doing a $500,000 opportunity. You get a chance to get your feet wet, you work out the kinks. The organizations, most of my business, my corporates who are working with suppliers, whether it be Indigenous, Black, racialized, they're not looking for one and done. They're looking to build a longer term relationship. I want to start you off at A. I want to grow you to B. I want to grow you to C. That's what they're looking to be able to do. And so therefore, as they build that company, this Indigenous business or racialized business or Black business, as you start to grow, you pull someone up behind you and you're bringing the next one up the line along those lines. But I think what we haven't done in the past, we're trying to be very focused now. Scaling is very distinct. You need to be at a certain point and you need to have certain levers to be able to scale. Let's look at that. If you're just a startup coming out, you might be just supplying to suppliers. That's who you're working with, and you're not working with larger scale corporates. But at a certain point, as a larger scale corporate, you might need to invest more money in your facilities to be able to do just that. So I think we have to be clear who needs to scale, who's at that point of scaling successfully, and who's at that point of just starting to grow their business and just doing their development. So those are the elements that come to mind when I think about that.
Are there different pools of funding in Canada that a business, an Indigenous business, would be able to navigate easily in terms of accessing, no matter where they are at startup or ready to scale?
I'm never sure if anything's easy when you talk about access to finance. Everyone talks about it being out there, but again, they're looking to make sure, because the government has given away money like grant money that if you need AI, you need a website. They've given, but those are small dollars. They don't allow you to scale. When you get into larger scale, larger money, like when we had Kevin Rose over in Australia and he came to New Zealand, Kevin says NACA has money and we want to be able to put money on the table to help grow business. We want to be able to identify those are at that level to be able to grow and put money into them. So NACA's done a great job on that. BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, they have divisions out there looking for Indigenous business to put money in to help grow those businesses. Now, each of our financial institutions, FIs, they have money out there, but again, the more structured organization like the financial institution, it's harder to get funding from there because there's a lot more rigor. Whereas the BDC and the NACA, they are prone to have more of a cultural bent on we're going to help and we're going to put things in place for you. So that's sort of the different levels that you see when you're looking at finance in the Canadian landscape.
Chris, in Australia, what support systems, finance instruments and business development initiatives existed to help Indigenous businesses start up, grow, scale, and then go into, exports?
Yeah, it's there's a lot going on, and it. How do I say this? Wouldn't it be nice if it was all better coordinated? But isn't that true of so many things?
Yes.
If we look at some of our federal government agencies outside of sort of those directly concerned with Indigenous development, we see that the Department of Foreign Affairs has established a unit of the First Nations Trade Unit and have appointed the world's first ambassador for First Nations people to kind of lead that push. They've established some grants programs to encourage activity. They've established the First Nations Trade and Investment Advisory Group, one member of which at least is listening in on this call, and they're doing an amazing job. They have negotiated 2 free trade agreements now with, following on from Aotearoa's activity, with First Nations components in it, one with the UAE, which has a First Nations chapter, the other, the yet to be ratified, but in the process of being ratified, FTA with the EU, free trade agreement, with the EU, with the European Union, which has a number of components directly relating to First Nations trade, First Nations intellectual property and cultural property, and those sort of things. So there's been a lot of lean forward in that regard. The Australia's Export Credit Agency, Export Finance Australia, is actively trying to identify more Indigenous exporters to whom it can provide export finance. Cassandra, when I was up there in Canada, had a meeting with the head of the Indigenous team at Export Development Canada. Wouldn't that be nice to have an actual Indigenous team in Australia? That would be fantastic. Austrade, the Australian Trade Commission, Australian Trade and Investment Commission, has an increasing focus on Indigenous engagement, Indigenous exports. We see the state governments, virtually all of our state and territory governments now, to some extent, have dedicated resources to help both Indigenous export, but also to work with FDI, foreign direct investment, to direct it towards proper engagement with Indigenous organisations. Our banks are increasingly trying to find ways to engage with First Nations borrowers. Their efforts are genuine, and we've seen over the time that their efforts are becoming increasingly, more effective. This is one of the frustrations, I guess, and we certainly heard the same message, Cassandra, when we're in Canada, is that while there may be areas of within lending institutions, especially non-Indigenous lending institutions, may be examples of unconscious bias towards Indigenous borrowers. Anyone that does any degree of serious lending to Indigenous business owners all report that they are amongst the lowest defaulters of any category of borrowers that they've ever dealt with. So there really are some realities around supporting the Indigenous business sector that I think are yet to fully take hold. And then we have the corporates. You made some great points, Cassandra, in that I think there's two bits to that. One is from the point of view of certification. Yes, companies want to know these businesses are who they say they are, and if nothing else, it relieves them of the burden to actually have to find them and have some confidence that they are who they say they are. That still doesn't abrogate their responsibilities to their own organizations to do their own due diligence on new suppliers. And I think those who are just looking to tick boxes and meet their quotas and then move on to real procurement, they're the ones that aren't that interested in that due diligence. They just hope that it's going to be okay. Those who take this very seriously are the ones that find out what they can about their businesses. Many are looking for drop-in replacements. They'd say, I'd rather buy this from an Indigenous business than a non-Indigenous business. Here's my order. And then sometimes companies can cope with that. Sometimes they don't have the scale to be able to do that. Some of our best corporates, though, will say, okay, I'm going to change how I procure this particular product or service to suit the supplier because I want to map out a growth path for them. So while those companies have to get these sort of support things, finance and so forth, to help them scale up, the thing that helps them scale up the most is a clear forward order book. How will I grow? Over what period of time? What will I need? And one thing we really got, I think Nanaya and Anna-Jane, you would have really seen it while we're up in Canada, is the connection between finance and procurement. We often talk about it as if they're two things we need to solve, and yet in Canada they're often resolved by being intertwined. And you can get finance more easily if you've got a really solid order book from someone good, and likewise you can win contracts if you've got the working capital and the access to capital needed to be able to meet those over a period of time. And I think that's something that's really important to learn from that Canadian experience.
Anna-Jane, in terms of the Aotearoa context and Māori and Pacific businesses accessing finance, give us a sense of some of the key challenges and opportunities that you've observed over your period of time.
That's a good question. I looked in envy when we were in Canada at the Indigenous financial institutions and the reduction of barriers for Indigenous business owners to access capital. While we have a range of different mechanisms in Aotearoa, I don't think we have anything quite as sophisticated or mature as IFIs. And I think that's where we really need to get to, is ways of trialling an IFI model that is connected clearly to contract opportunities that support small to medium-sized businesses to scale. Because like Chris was saying, that experience in Canada of far less defaulting than what you'd see in a mainstream financial institution is something that I believe we would also see in Aotearoa. And I think about the hypothesis that sits behind our mahi, right? And particularly in this space, for us, it's about what solidarity looks like in the Indigenous business space across jurisdictions globally, and how the access to capital, access to contracts, appetite of corporate global corporates are all aligned to enable us to really leverage those opportunities and grow impact in our communities as a result. I think we've got some of those pieces and lots to learn, particularly in the access to capital space in Aotearoa. And that's why these types of relationships and this type of kōrero is important for us to continue to reflect and learn and action what we're learning. The last thing I'd probably say is when things are connected to tangible opportunities, it just makes it a whole heap easier to understand the problems and solutions that sit behind those things. So one of the things that I really loved about our trip to Canada, particularly with our Australian cousins, is the businesses that you brought with you, Chris, and the sectors in which they represented, and the clear market opportunities they could see in Canada, and how then Austrade is becomes a facilitator of those connections and opportunities, and Supply Nation, Amotai and CAMSI and others provide connections into tribes, into corporates, into the government of Canada and other places to enable that to happen. So for me, what does solidarity look like in this space when we're thinking about global business opportunities that are Indigenous to Indigenous? How is that connected to tangible contracts? And then how do we organise ourselves better, both to advocate for the right types of finance and access to capital, and the right policy levers to smooth that path, which I think is you guys are already doing in Tauhokohoko, and an important part of that conversation we need to continue to have in Aotearoa.
Chris, that light touch link between finance and procurement holds substantial meaning, because I think that's the shift in terms of our common trajectory that we do want to take. Do you want to share a little bit about the NACA MOU and what it's intended to achieve between partners? And for the audience that are listening, try and break that down a bit in terms of practical benefits.
I think there's a couple of elements to that. I think in the case of NACA, obviously they are coming from a financial point of view, being this is the those who haven't read their notes, the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, who manage a network of some, I think, 55 of the Indigenous financial institutions that Anna mentioned a little earlier, and the ability to spend some time with them at their conference and listen to how those organizations do their business. They're decades old. They didn't pop up overnight, and they've been working on from the very small. I mean, there was one really remarkable video they showed, which was interviews with a whole lot of those sort of original CEOs of those IFIs, and no one wanted to play with them when they first got going. It was hard work, and yet they've now become a recognized part of the scenario. And certainly there's a couple of specific IFIs I was talking to who really sort of captured this idea of the intertwining of procurement and finance, but I think it can go further, as you suggested, Nanaya, into how does this go into Indigenous with Indigenous trade. You've already got financial institutions that understand First Nations businesses as a borrower. You have financial institutions and procurement organizations who have a level of trust in that space, take a cultural approach to data collection. To a lot of people, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, might raise a chuckle. It's not that funny in this space. It's very difficult. And Cassandra, you referred to the report by the Canadian Procurement Ombudsman, that government Indigenous businesses list is maintained by the government, and I think the report suggested there's a little bit of work to do to improve that. And I think the experience from on this call would suggest that a cultural focus, a cultural connection, and a cultural grounding, and a separation and independence is a really important way to collect information and to provide support to Indigenous businesses. You could then take that further and say, if you have that ability to do that, how can you use that information to make evidence-based decisions to maximize the economic benefit to those businesses? So, I think by having connectivity, there's a really good way to look. I don't deny that I know what the answer is, but I'm pretty sure that these are the people and these are the levers that they have to be able to work it out. And I think by having agreements to be able to sit down, to be able to say, how do you do what you do? How would you like to do what you do? How does that connect with what others are doing? To be able to create, by using that information, a pathway where you have Indigenous with Indigenous trade supported by access to information, supported by access to capital, and perhaps most importantly, especially early on, supported by the power of proactive economic allyship. So we look at our businesses and people like to say, but are you export ready? And this was a business I was in for many years, and I have to say I arc up at that term. A value chain has to be export ready, but to say no individual company can dare go out overseas unless someone has given them an export readiness stamp is preposterous. Most of our great exporters just went and gave it a red hot go. They didn't wait for someone to give them permission to export. However, we know our three organisations here work every day with corporates and government organisations who really are dedicated to see these businesses succeed. And if we can give them a pathway beyond procurement, to come back to that term, to help them, and if that can include the people who we gather around us and the information that we have about those businesses as a way of de-risking the financial component of it. So if you could go to maybe your export credit agency or to a bank and say, hey, listen, this is who these businesses are. This is who's around them. These are the people supporting them. This is who your end customer is, a huge company. Have another think about how you assess the risk to engaging financially with this organization, because you're actually working with a village. Then I think that would be somewhere where I think we can realistically go, and these sort of agreements I think provide a foundation for that.
So is it the intention, and please, any one of you on the panel could answer the question, but is it the intention of the MOU to share knowledge and be a part of creating, I guess, the ecosystem of support that will help to better inform, or I'm trying to pull out the tangible things that Indigenous businesses might expect to see as that MOU matures?
I would lean in to say that they're probably trying to get the best of breed from all countries to begin with, right? Because you want success stories that you can really run with. So whether it be particular industries that are common across the area, particular suppliers who have some deep dish expertise in their country that you can now expand to another country, and then for that provide them access to capital as they grow the business. Also, that leans into joint ventures or partnerships in other countries. So now you get feet in all countries. If I were Kevin in the NACA group, I'd be looking for those key examples to begin with, to set the beginning of this is what success looks like, and then you start to build from there. Because I wouldn't want someone who doesn't have deep dish experience in their own country to suddenly be jumping across to say, oh, come to Canada and we can make the, because again, what we're looking to see is where are some of the gaps that we can start to fill in. So you want someone who brings some of that experience that you can actually start to sort of say, okay, we have a roadmap. Oh, we're missing A, we're missing D. Let's fill that in so it becomes easier for the next ones who follow that. Now, Chris, I don't know if that's what the team talked to you about. That to me would be the route that they would be going.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got a. Sorry, Anna, carry on.
one of the things that I really loved about the NACA conference was both of the conferences, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition and NACA, was the proximity to tribal authorities and the size of their businesses and the opportunities that lie within those businesses for Indigenous business to business contracts and growth. So whilst we've spent a lot of time talking about the corporate opportunities, there is also this whole other aspect that we haven't touched on at all, both here at home and across the globe, in terms of those really large tribes and or tribal owned businesses that present some untapped opportunities for us to explore. And it was beautiful to have different iwi and hapu represented at the FNNPC conference in Toronto to explore that. And whilst we play a role in that ecosystem as Āmotai, Supply Nation and KMC, recognise the role of tribes in creating those relationships themselves in the ecosystem, enabling that to happen. And then just to touch on Mika's question around whether we have IFIs in Indigenous financial institutions in Aotearoa, I haven't seen anything like it in Aotearoa. I'm sure that there are things that could potentially move in that way. That's why it was so exciting, because it was just so clear at NACA, and that's why NACA also establishing the First Nations Procurement Authority. So it's quite interesting to see how they are starting to think about bringing those two things together and what it could potentially look like in our context.
I'm going to ask us all to draw breath because we are coming towards the end of our program, and you've been all very generous with sharing your experiences and insights. I think I've got so many more questions that I'd like to ask you, but I should finish on the prepared question because I'm mindful that the audience are really wanting to quickly learn from the comparative experiences and knowledge that we have in the room today. If you could change one thing tomorrow to accelerate Indigenous business success beyond procurement, what would it be? Can I start with Anna, and then we'll move through to Chris and finish with Cassandra?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. On August the 5th, usually we have a summit each year. And this year we've pivoted our annual summit to really delve into what impacts looks like and who is impacted as a result of the mahi in which we are doing. We're going to Ihumātao on the 5th of August because that's actually one of the very first contract opportunities that we had. Makoto Marae, through Auckland Transport, engaged Light Civil, a Māori-owned business to build their new car park and driveway. So we're taking it back to grassroots to really understand who is impacted by the mahi that we do and the opportunities that it creates in whānau and across our hapori. And then how that supports some of the real challenges that we face in Aotearoa to hold on to whenua, to grow opportunity both for Māori and Pasifika communities, and grow wealth and well-being as a result. So what would I change? I think it's the lens, the perspective in which we look at the mahi in which we do. Because for us, and I'm sure this is the same for KMC and Supply Nation, it really is around that intersection between environmental, economic, social and cultural outcomes that we achieve. And so for me, procurement is that lever that enables us to express all of those things. And the focus should actually be on those 4 quadrants and how we measure the impact that it's having. And that starts by going back to our communities and understanding what impact looks like for them.
Thank you. Chris?
Wow.
Oh.
Thank you, Anna. I just want to say what Anna said. I think I believe quite passionately in the potential for Indigenous with Indigenous trade. Of course, it's not the only pathway for trade, and in many cases where an Indigenous business can see an overseas market and the obvious customers are these people, they should go to those people, right? I mean, they should learn it's not just about that. But that power, when you see, and we see this wherever we go, but certainly in Canada, when you see Indigenous companies sit with Indigenous companies and that connectivity that just sparks up so quickly. I've been doing trade promotion for years. I don't think I've ever seen that between non-Indigenous organisations. Nanaya, it's very humbling for me to answer a question from you about this because you articulate this probably better than anyone I've ever seen in terms of what that power is, how we are talking about not the transactional, but the relationship, how we're talking about resiliency, self-sustainability, multi-generational business. So what would I change to make that happen? It would be to get governments and that powerful allyship to start thinking more imaginatively around how that can be supported, how it can be sustained, and how it can be nurtured going forward. I think the capability is there, but I would love to see that slight attitudinal shift to support that.
Thank you. Thank you. Cassandra?
Okay, I love what my colleagues have said. I'm really enthused by what I hear, excited by what I hear. Things that come to mind instantly for me is this global connection is important. The more we've opened the doors, the more we find commonality, the more we can share success stories, the more we can share resources. I think that's vitally important. I mean, the fact that the geopolitics caused it to happen or made more focus, we were doing it all along. It just brought more focus to it, but it made it, how important is that we connect and we can share those stories, we can share those resources. I think that's going to be vital to making that speedy or expediting where we're going. The other part in the Canadian environment itself, what we need to do in Canada, I want our government to be clear on what their strategy is, because the minute they're clearer on their strategy, the more our Indigenous people can grow and actually build success from there and enable them to go global from that perspective. I'm excited at what there is out there. I'm excited you folks came to Canada. I'm excited that we're all talking the same language. I just see the possibilities are endless.
They are endless, and I think
Yes.
people who have joined this panel today have heard the relationship building that has occurred amongst you all, and we benefit from that because you've put so much effort into ensuring that not only is the conversation aligned, the knowledge sharing is generous, and also the ability to pick up the phone or get on the Zoom and just say, look, this is what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Are there any lessons that I can learn from you? So thank you all so much, Chris, Cassandra, Anna, for joining the panel discussion. We hope to have prompted some thinking amongst listeners about procurement, both in the public and private sector, how iwi might think about access to financing and creating consortia, perhaps taking the learnings from overseas, but more importantly, thriving on what we have to offer the world because our cultural values align with our economic systems and the ecosystem we want to create, which is an advantage for everybody. I'll end with a karakia. Kia tau te Māori, kia tau te ora, kia taia te hononga nā rangi, nā papa mā tātou e pai nei. Mauri ora. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Kia ora.